Captain Kim Jae-woo stared at the massive holographic display that dominated the bridge of the New Seoul. The blue light from the transmission cast strange shadows across his weathered face as 12 alien representatives appeared before him. 50 long years had passed since humanity first reached out to touch the stars and found they were not alone. What had started as wonder and hope had slowly turned into something much darker. The crystalline form of High Counselor Velran shimmered as it spoke. Its voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but underneath lay something that made Kim's jaw tighten with anger. Condescension. Pure, undisguised contempt for everything human. Citizens of Earth and her colonies, Velran began, its form pulsing with each word. The Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision regarding your military capabilities. All human military assets are hereby ordered to stand down immediately and submit to complete decommission protocols. Kim felt his hands curl into fists. Around him, the bridge crew of the New Seoul remained perfectly still, but he could feel their tension like electricity in the air. These were good people. Soldiers who had served with honor in the outer colonies, protecting mining operations from pirates and keeping the trade routes safe. Now they were being told they were no longer needed. The galaxy has evolved beyond your primitive kinetic warfare, Velran continued, its tone growing more dismissive with each syllable. Your crude explosives and metal projectiles are relics of a barbaric past. We have moved beyond such unrefined methods. The transmission shifted to show the council chambers on Concordia Prime, the glittering capital world where the fate of trillions was decided. Ambassador Park Min-ji stood at the speaking podium, her small human form dwarfed by the towering alien delegates around her. Kim had known Park since the early days of first contact. She was brilliant, diplomatic, and utterly dedicated to humanity's place in the galaxy. Right now she looked like she was fighting a losing battle. Honored counselors, Park said, her voice steady despite the obvious strain, humanity respectfully requests the right to maintain basic defensive capabilities for our colonies. We have over 200 settled worlds, many of them on the frontier where. Denied, came the harsh interruption from the hive mind representative of the collective. The creature was a writhing mass of interconnected neural tissue that spoke with 1,000 voices in perfect unison. Your species has served adequately in its assigned roles as laborers and merchants. Military functions are far beyond your evolutionary scope. Kim watched as other council members nodded in agreement. The energy beings of the Luminari flickered with what might have been amusement. The insectoid Vrath clicked their mandibles in approval. The towering Nexari simply stared down at the human ambassador with their multiple eyes, saying nothing but clearly supporting the decision. Furthermore, Velran added, its crystalline form brightening, any resistance to this directive will be met with immediate economic sanctions and possible expulsion from council space. You will comply, or you will find yourselves alone in the darkness between stars. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge of the New Seoul in sudden silence. Kim stared at the empty air where the hologram had been, his mind racing through the implications. Every human military vessel would be stripped of weapons. Every defense station would be shut down. Every soldier would be sent home to find work in the mines or the shipping lanes. Through the vast viewports that surrounded the bridge, Kim could see the sprawling human colony of New Busan stretched across the planet's surface below. 3 million people called this world home. Farmers, engineers, teachers, children playing in schools built under an alien sun. All of them would now be completely defenseless. Sir? Lieutenant Lee Jinsu's voice broke the heavy silence. The young weapons officer stood at his station, his hands hovering over controls that would soon be permanently disabled. What are our orders? Kim looked around at his crew. 23 men and women who had followed him through asteroid fields and combat zones, who had trusted him to bring them home safe from every mission. They were all looking at him now, waiting for him to tell them what came next. He thought about the sealed orders he had received that morning from Fleet Command on Earth. Emergency protocols that were older than first contact. Contingency plans that had been gathering dust in classified databases for decades. Plans that assumed this day might come. We comply with the Council directive, Kim said finally, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. All weapon systems will be powered down and marked for decommission. All military protocols will be suspended. He saw the disappointment in their faces, the anger that matched his own. But he also saw something else. Understanding. Trust. They knew him well enough to hear what he was not saying. However, Kim continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, we also remember everything we have learned. Every tactic, every strategy, every lesson written in blood and sacrifice. We remember who we are and where we came from. Lieutenant Lee nodded slowly. Understood, sir. We remember. Kim turned back to the viewport and the colony below. Somewhere out there in the darkness between stars, threats still moved through the void. Pirates, rogue AI fleets, ancient things that the Council had forgotten or chose to ignore. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and now humanity was being told to face it unarmed. But Captain Kim Jaiwoo had not survived 2 decades in space by following every order blindly. As he watched the lights of New Busan twinkle like stars on the planet's surface, he made himself a quiet promise. They would comply with the letter of the law. But they would never, ever forget who they truly were. Dr. Choi Hyun-woo pushed his glasses up his nose as he stared at the glowing screen in front of him. The archives beneath the Galactic Council headquarters were vast and cold, filled with the military history of 1,000 worlds. But lately he had noticed something disturbing. Human history was being quietly erased. He scrolled through the official record of the Battle of Titan, shaking his head in frustration. What had really happened was incredible. 30 human ships against 200 pirate vessels in the asteroid belt around Saturn. The pirates had better weapons, faster ships, and overwhelming numbers. But the humans had something else. They had refused to give up. For 6 months, Captain Martinez and his small fleet had played a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the asteroids. They used mining charges as weapons, turned cargo haulers into ramming ships, and fought with a stubborn determination that the pirates could not understand. When it was over, the pirate fleet was scattered and broken. But according to the official council records, it was just a minor skirmish, where alien intervention proved decisive. The truth about human courage and cleverness had been buried under bureaucratic language. "They are doing it again," Dr. Choi muttered to his research assistant, Kim Sora, who sat at the next desk. She was young and eager, one of the few people who still cared about preserving real history. "What do you mean, Doctor?" she asked, looking up from her own research. "The siege of Europa Station," he said, pulling up another file. "Do you know what really happened there?" Kim Sora shook her head. According to the official records, it was just a footnote about primitive close-quarters combat during a minor defensive action. Dr. Choi leaned back in his chair and began to tell the real story. Europa Station had been attacked by a fleet of automated warships left over from an ancient war. The station's shields had failed in the first hour. The evacuation ships had been destroyed in the second hour. By the third hour, the enemy had breached the hull and begun boarding the station. What happened next should have been a massacre. The aliens had advanced energy weapons and force fields. The humans had rifles, grenades, and whatever tools they could find in the maintenance lockers. But the human marines had something the enemy robots could not understand or counter. They fought room by room, corridor by corridor, never retreating even when the situation seemed hopeless. "They held the station for 18 days, Dr. Choi said quietly. 18 days of hand-to-hand fighting in zero gravity, using nothing but courage and determination. When the relief fleet finally arrived, they found 300 Marines still fighting, even though they were outnumbered 50 to 1. But why would the Council want to hide stories like that?" Kim Sora asked. Dr. Choi sighed and looked around the empty archives. "They do not understand us. They think evolution means abandoning what works. They see our methods as primitive because we still believe in fighting with our hands, in never giving up even when the odds are impossible." That was when the first emergency alerts began flashing on their screens. Dr. Choi and Kim Sora looked at each other in confusion as automated warnings filled the air around them. Something was happening at the edge of Council space. Dr. Choi quickly accessed the tactical feeds from the border systems. What he saw made his blood run cold. Dark ships were emerging from the void between galaxies, moving like shadows across the star field. They were not like anything in the galactic databases. These ships seemed to absorb light itself, creating holes in space wherever they went. "Void hunters," he whispered, recognizing them from the oldest historical records. "But they are supposed to be extinct." The Galactic Council had believed the Void Hunters were destroyed 1,000 years ago. These ancient enemies consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space behind them. They existed partially outside normal reality, making them nearly impossible to fight with conventional weapons. Dr. Choi watched the tactical displays with growing horror as the Council fleets moved to intercept the Void Hunters. The elegant Zephyrian crystal ships went first, their beautiful formations sparkling like jewels in the darkness. But when they fired their energy weapons at the Hunter ships, the beams simply disappeared into the void shields. Then the crystal ships began to crack and shatter like glass under some invisible pressure. The collective sent their hive mind fleets next. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, thousands of vessels acting as one mind. But when the hive minds tried to communicate with the Void Hunters, something went terribly wrong. The perfect coordination collapsed as the alien thoughts touched something that existed outside normal space and time. The collective ships began firing on each other in confusion and madness. The Luminari, beings of pure energy, tried to engage the enemy directly. They simply vanished when they made contact with the void shields, absorbed into nothingness without even a flash of light to mark their passing. Thousands of light years away on the frontier, Captain Kim Jae-woo sat on the bridge of the New Sol and listened to fragmentary distress calls from Council worlds. The transmissions were broken and filled with static, but the message was clear. The mighty Galactic Council was losing badly. His ship was officially decommissioned. His weapons were supposedly disabled. His crew had been ordered to stand down and await reassignment to civilian duties. But Kim Jae-woo had not survived 20 years in the dangerous frontier by following every regulation exactly. "Lieutenant Lee," he said quietly to his weapons officer, "how long would it take to reactivate our weapons systems?" Lieutenant Lee Jinsu looked up from his station with a carefully neutral expression. "Officially, sir, they cannot be reactivated. The decommission protocols are permanent and irreversible." "Unofficially?" Lee Jinsu's face broke into a grim smile. 20 minutes, Captain." President Yoon Jae-hyung stood behind his desk in the rebuilt Blue House, staring at the holographic display that had just materialized in his office. The irony of the moment was not lost on him. 6 months ago, these same alien faces had dismissed humanity as primitive and useless. Now they were calling for help with voices full of barely controlled panic. High Counselor Velran's crystalline form flickered and wavered as if the transmission itself was unstable. The proud alien leader who had once spoken with absolute authority now seemed smaller somehow, diminished by desperation and fear. "President Yoon," Velran began, its voice lacking the condescending tone from their last conversation, "the situation at our border worlds has become more challenging than we initially anticipated." President Yoon said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than any words. Behind him, through the reinforced windows of his office, he could see the bustling activity of Seoul. People went about their daily lives, unaware that the galaxy was burning just beyond their reach. "We formally request the immediate deployment of all available human vessels to assist in evacuation procedures," Velran continued, its form pulsing with what might have been embarrassment. "Your transport ships could serve a vital role in moving civilian populations away from the combat zones." "Evacuation," President Yoon repeated slowly, tasting the word. "Not defense. Not counterattack. You want us to run away." The other council members shifted uncomfortably in the holographic display. The hive mind representative of the collective spoke next, its 1,000 voices somehow sounding uncertain for the first time in recorded history. "Our strategic analyses indicate that tactical withdrawal is the most prudent course of action. Your vessels can serve as adequate transport while our surviving fleets conduct organized retreats to more defensible positions." President Yoon felt his jaw tighten. Even now, even when they were losing badly, the aliens could not bring themselves to treat humans as equals. They still saw humanity as useful servants, good enough to carry luggage but not worthy of fighting alongside them. "You told us to disarm," the president said, his voice growing colder with each word. "You said we were obsolete, that our methods were barbaric. You called us primitive and told us that military functions were beyond our evolutionary scope." He gestured to the apparently empty space behind him. "You wanted merchants and laborers, not soldiers. We gave you exactly what you asked for." The camera angle was carefully chosen to show nothing but empty air behind the president. To the council members watching, it would appear that humanity had indeed followed orders and dismantled their military completely. But the camera was lying. Beyond the range of the transmission, through reinforced windows that the aliens could not see, the Seoul shipyards hummed with constant activity. Massive construction cranes moved through the void, assembling hull plates and weapon systems with practiced efficiency. Workers in environmental suits crawled over half-finished warships like busy ants. But Seoul was just the beginning. What the council could not see were the dozens of other facilities scattered across human space. Hidden construction yards built inside hollowed-out asteroids. Weapons depots buried deep beneath the surfaces of airless moons. Research stations disguised as mining operations where human engineers had spent 50 years improving on designs that aliens had dismissed as obsolete. Most importantly, there were the people. The soldiers and sailors who had supposedly been discharged and sent home to civilian careers. In reality, many of them had simply changed uniforms. The former Captain Martinez now ran a shipping company that employed an unusual number of ex-military pilots. The retired Admiral Chen had started a mining consortium whose employees all seemed remarkably well-trained in small-unit tactics. Thousands of light-years away, Admiral Song Minwo stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Inchan's Revenge and read the message he had been waiting 50 years to receive. The activation codes were simple and direct, but they represented the culmination of decades of careful planning. The Inchan's Revenge had been listed in official records as a decommissioned hulk, stripped of weapons and sold for scrap metal. In reality, it was the flagship of the rebuilt Pacific Fleet, hidden in a construction facility built inside a captured asteroid. Its weapons were more advanced than anything the original human military had possessed, improved by 50 years of secret research and development. Admiral Song walked to the fleet communications station and activated the secure channel that connected every hidden human military facility across known space. Ships that had been disguised as cargo haulers began shedding their false hull plating. Weapons platforms that had masqueraded as mining stations powered up their targeting systems. Soldiers who had spent years pretending to be farmers and factory workers reached for rifles they had kept hidden in root cellars and abandoned warehouses. All ships and stations, Admiral Song announced, his voice carrying across the vast network of human military forces. This is Prometheus Command. Operation Thermopylae is now active. I repeat, Operation Thermopylae is now active. All units are to proceed to battle stations immediately. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across human space, thousands of voices acknowledged the order. Ships that had been waiting in the darkness powered up their engines. Crews that had been drilling in secret for half a century ran to their posts with practiced efficiency. The humans were going back to war. And this time they would fight on their own terms. President Yoon looked back at the Alien Council members, who were still waiting for his response to their plea for help. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and measured, but underneath lay something that made the aliens shift nervously in their seats. You will have your answer soon, he said simply and cut the transmission. The human fleet materialized out of hyperspace like a pack of hungry wolves descending on unsuspecting prey. But these were not the elegant formations that the galaxy had come to expect from civilized warfare. There were no perfect geometric patterns or graceful battle lines. Instead, the human ships moved in loose, aggressive clusters that seemed to have no organization at all. Commander Han Seo-young stood on the bridge of her destroyer Gwangju's Fire and watched the enemy vessels turn to meet them. The Void Hunter ships were massive and terrifying, their dark hulls seeming to absorb the light from nearby stars. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met anything they could not consume. They think we will be easy meat, she said to her weapons officer, Lieutenant Park Sun-ho. Just like the pretty council fleets they have been destroying for the past 6 months. The Void Hunters had good reason for their confidence. They had shattered the crystal armadas of the Zephyrians without breaking a sweat. The perfect coordination of the collective had crumbled into madness when it touched their alien minds. Even the energy beings of the Luminari had simply vanished when they tried to fight these creatures from the dark spaces between galaxies. But the humans were different. Their ships were ugly compared to the elegant alien vessels. Scarred metal hulls bristled with weapons that looked crude and primitive. There were no smooth curves or artistic designs. These were tools built for one purpose only, to destroy the enemy completely. All ships, execute Pattern Delta. Admiral Song's voice crackled across the fleet communication channel from his flagship Inchan's Revenge. Remember what we learned in the simulations. They cannot shield against what they cannot detect. The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions like a school of fish avoiding a shark. But this was no panicked retreat. Each ship moved with deadly purpose, following tactics that had been practiced in secret for 50 years. The Void Hunters fired their terrible weapons, beams of pure darkness that had torn apart every enemy they had faced. But the beams passed harmlessly through empty space where the human ships had been just moments before. The humans were no longer where the enemy expected them to be. Deploy the surprises, Commander Han ordered her crew. Around her destroyer, small objects began separating from the hull. They looked like ordinary pieces of space debris, but each one contained a nuclear warhead and a proximity sensor. Across the battle zone, other human ships were doing the same thing. Stealth frigates that had been invisible to enemy sensors suddenly revealed themselves long enough to scatter their deadly cargo, then vanished back into the darkness. Within minutes, the space around the Void Hunter fleet had become a maze of hidden death. The first Hunter ship to hit one of the mines simply disappeared in a flash of nuclear fire. Then another. And another. The alien vessels, which had been moving with arrogant confidence just moments before, suddenly found themselves afraid to advance. Now hit them with the real weapons, Admiral Song commanded. The human ships opened fire with weapons that the Galactic Council had dismissed as hopelessly primitive. Railguns that fired solid metal slugs at incredible speeds. Missile launchers that sent swarms of nuclear warheads racing through space. Plasma cannons that superheated matter to temperatures found only in the hearts of stars. The Void Hunter shields, which had easily stopped the energy weapons of the Council fleets, proved useless against simple chunks of metal moving at nearly the speed of light. Railgun slugs punched through the void shields like they were not even there, tearing massive holes in the dark hulls of the enemy ships. But the most devastating human tactic was something that no civilized species would ever consider. Boarding actions. Small pods launched from human ships raced through the battle zone, carrying Marines directly onto enemy vessels. The Council had always called this a suicide tactic, impossible against an advanced enemy. Lieutenant Colonel Park Ji-hoon led the first boarding team as their pod crashed through the hull of a Hunter mothership. The impact threw him against his restraints, but he was on his feet and moving before the pod had even stopped shaking. "Move, move, move," he shouted to his Marines as they poured out of the pod and into the alien ship. They carried weapons that would have made the Council laugh: combat knives, plasma cutters, and chemical explosives. Old-fashioned tools for killing enemies up close. But inside the Hunter ship, where the void shields could not protect them, these primitive weapons proved devastatingly effective. The Marines fought their way through corridors that seemed to bend reality around them, using nothing but courage and determination to overcome enemies that existed partially outside normal space. "Control, this is boarding Team Alpha," Park radioed back to his command ship, his voice tight with adrenaline and the strain of combat. "The void shields do not work when you are already inside their ship. Beginning placement of demolition charges on their main power core." The tide of battle truly turned during what would later be called the Battle of the Kepler Nebula. Admiral Song made a decision that no Council commander would have ever considered. He executed Protocol Thermopylae, a tactic that had been named after an ancient Earth battle where soldiers had chosen to die rather than retreat. "All damaged vessels," Admiral Song transmitted to his fleet, "prepare for final engagement. Use your reactors as weapons. Take as many of them with you as possible." Captain Kim Jae-woo received the order aboard his crippled destroyer. His ship was barely holding together, his crew reduced to half strength, but his weapons were still firing. He looked around at his remaining crew members and saw the same determination in their eyes that had carried humanity through countless wars. "You heard the Admiral," he told them. "Set course for that Hunter dreadnought. Full speed." As his ship raced toward the enemy vessel, Kim opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "They forgot something important about us," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "We do not just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies can never threaten anyone ever again." The new Soul struck the Hunter ship at maximum speed, its reactor detonating in a blast that consumed both vessels completely. 3 months had passed since the last Void Hunter ship had been destroyed in the fires of human determination. The Great Council chambers on Concordia Prime looked very different now. Where once the seats had been arranged to show the importance of each species, with humans relegated to the back corners like unwanted guests, everything had changed. Ambassador Lee Jin-hyuk sat at the central table, right where the most important decisions were made. He had once been Captain Kim Jae-woo's communications officer aboard the New Soul, but now he wore the formal robes of the Council's new military coordinator. The irony was not lost on him. The same species that had been told they were too primitive for military service was now in charge of defending the entire galaxy. Around the Great Circular Chamber, the surviving representatives of the alien civilizations watched the human delegation with expressions that mixed gratitude with barely concealed worry. They were grateful to be alive, but they were also afraid of what humanity's new position might mean for their own power. High Counselor Velran approached the human section with steps that seemed much smaller than before. The crystalline being's once proud form now flickered with uncertainty. His dominion, which had once controlled hundreds of star systems, was now reduced to just 3 surviving worlds. Most of his people had been consumed by the Void Hunters before the humans had arrived to save what remained. "Ambassador Lee," Velran said, his voice lacking the arrogant tone that had once made humans clench their fists in anger, "we wish to formally acknowledge that our previous assessment of human military capabilities was incomplete." Lee looked up from the data pad he had been reading and studied the alien leader for a long moment. He could have been cruel. He could have reminded Velran of every insult, every dismissive comment, every time humanity had been told they were not good enough to stand alongside the great civilizations of the galaxy. Instead he chose a different path. "You did not misjudge our capabilities, Counselor," Lee replied, his voice diplomatic but carrying an edge of steel that had not been there before. You forgot that sometimes the old ways work because they have been tested by necessity. You wanted to make us servants when what you really needed were guardians. Dr. Choi Hyun-woo stood up from his seat at the human table. The former archives researcher now bore the title of Director of Galactic Defense Studies, a position that had been created specifically for him after his knowledge of military history had proved invaluable during the war. He activated a holographic display that showed the current state of galactic defenses. We have prepared a comprehensive proposal, Dr. Choi announced to the assembled representatives. Joint training programs where human tactical doctrine will be integrated with your advanced technologies. Defense pacts that recognize all species as equal partners, not senior and junior members. Most importantly, a guarantee that never again will any civilization be forced to disarm while threats exist in the darkness between stars. The holographic display showed images of human and alien ships working together, their different technologies complementing each other in ways that made both stronger. Human boarding tactics enhanced by alien force field technology. Alien energy weapons guided by human targeting systems that never gave up on a target. It was a vision of cooperation that had been impossible just months before. A new voice joined the conversation as President Yoon appeared in a holographic projection from Earth. The leader of humanity looked older than before, worn down by the weight of decisions that had saved the galaxy but cost so many lives. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of someone who had seen the worst the universe could offer and had refused to surrender. The galaxy is vast and dangerous, President Yoon said, his image flickering slightly due to the enormous distance the transmission had to travel. It needs protectors who understand that peace is not simply the absence of conflict. True peace is what good people are willing to fight to preserve. The council session continued for several more hours as the details of humanity's proposals were discussed and debated. Some alien species worried about giving humans too much power. Others argued that humanity had already proven they could be trusted with that power. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The galaxy needed guardians, and humanity had shown they were willing to pay the price that guardianship demanded. 6 months later, Admiral Song Minwo stood on the observation deck of the new Joint Command Station that orbited Earth like an artificial moon. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see something that would have been impossible to imagine just a year before. Human destroyers flew in formation with rebuilt Zephyrian crystal ships. Collective vessels, their hive minds now protected by human-designed psychic shields, practiced boarding maneuvers alongside Marines from Terra. Even the energy beings of the Luminari had returned, working with human engineers to develop new weapons that combined matter and energy in ways neither species could have achieved alone. Commander Han Seo-young joined him at the viewport, her new rank insignia still gleaming on her uniform collar. She had been promoted after her actions during the Battle of Kepler Nebula, where her destroyer had been one of the few ships to survive the final engagement with the Void Hunter fleet. "Do you think they will remember this time, sir?" she asked, watching as a human boarding pod successfully docked with an alien training ship while both vessels maneuvered at high speed. Admiral Song smiled as he watched the mixed fleet execute maneuvers that blended the best of human aggression with alien precision. The ships moved together like dancers who had finally learned each other's steps, stronger together than either could ever be alone. "They will remember," he said confidently. "And if they forget again, we will be here to remind them. That is what Guardians do." Far out in the darkness between galaxies, early warning stations staffed by human crews kept their sensors pointed toward the void, watching for new threats that might emerge from the spaces where light itself feared to go. The galaxy was still vast and dangerous, full of ancient things that slept in the dark and waited for their chance to consume everything that lived and breathed and hoped. But now those threats would not go unchallenged. Humanity had found its true place among the stars, not as servants or curiosities or primitive relics of a violent past, but as the sentinels who stood guard while others slept peacefully in their beds. The galaxy would not forget again.